We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. Well, today marks the anniversary of the first year since the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine. We'll be joined in the show by Ukrainian MP Andrei Ozashuk, Cheltenham senior consultant Keir Giles on why Russia invaded Ukraine, and Ben Hodges, former commander of US forces in Europe, on the military perspective. Conservative MP Duncan Baker, he was one of the first members of Parliament to open the doors of his home to a family of Ukrainian refugees. After almost a year living with him, he shares with us how it has all been. And we'll cross live to Northern Ireland with our reporter Dougie Beattie on the latest on the attempted murder of an off-duty police officer. As always, I want to hear from you. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. But first, here's the news with Rihanna.
Arlene, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. A minute's silence was held across the UK this morning, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. At Downing Street, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK to reflect on the country's losses. Britain's imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia uses on the battlefield. President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of security and the chief executive of Nord Stream 2. In Kyiv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky attended a ceremony with families of soldiers killed in the conflict. He described the past 12 months as a year of pain, sorrow, faith and unity. Former President Petro Poroshenko spoke to us about the human cost of Russia's invasion.
Can you imagine that Ukraine lost dozens and dozens of thousands of the innocent civilians from Bucha to Mariupol, from the military criminal Putin? But together, can you imagine that 8 million Ukrainians leave Ukraine and go abroad? 2.5 million of Ukrainian children go to the school abroad because of your solidarity. But this is the humanitarian disaster.
Poland has delivered its first Leopard tanks to Ukraine and says it's ready to supply more very quickly. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki also says the country will train Ukrainians on F-16 fighter planes. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has warned the war could last 12 months, but says the UK isn't in a position to send fighter jets to Ukraine immediately.
I think it's just really about managing the realities of saying that we just simply can't hand over Western jets and expect them to be used in the short term. I think what you can say is that if there are other countries with Russian or Soviet jets, which they could just transfer over, Britain will explore what it can do to give those countries that reassurance that their own skies will be protected. We've already done that in places like Romania and Poland, where we've flown patrols to help with protecting their skies, and obviously we have some air defence assets in Poland. So I think that is, to me, the best and quickest way we can help Ukraine.
In other news, union doctors will stage 3 days of strike action next month. The British Medical Associations announced they'll walk off the job from the 13th of March. Nearly 37,000 BMA members voted in favour of industrial action, the largest ever turnout for a ballot of doctors. It follows a series of strikes by nurses and ambulance workers. Puffin UK has announced Roald Dahl's classic collection will keep the author's original texts in print. It follows criticism of recent editing of his work to remove potentially offensive language. It's understood Puffin will continue with the publication of the amended texts as well as releasing the originals. Camilla, the Queen Consort, yesterday urged authors to resist curbs of freedom of expression. Stormont leaders say they're united, standing with the Northern Ireland Police Service in the wake of Wednesday's shooting. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell remains in a critical but stable condition after being shot by 2 masked gunmen at a sports centre in Omagh. Police say a 4th man has been arrested in connection with his attempted murder. Sinn Féin's Vice President Michelle O'Neill described it as an attack on the entire community.
It is so important in moments like this that we stand united, and we do stand here united as one voice in our condemnation against this horrific attack on a police officer, someone who's part of our community. And I think that the most powerful message that we as political leaders can do is to stand with the Chief Constable today, to stand with the police service and to say this is not good enough, this is an attack on all of us, this is an attack on our community.
Hamza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Reagan have all advanced to the next round in the contest to succeed Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister and SNP leader. The candidates will now hit the campaign trail to persuade members they can lead the party and the country. The ballot will open on March the 13th, with the winner announced on the 27th of the same month. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to the briefing with Arlene.
Welcome to the show. Well, 1 year ago today, Russia invaded Ukraine in a major escalation of a conflict which began in 2014, when Russian separatists launched military action in the eastern region of the country, seizing and annexing Crimea. It led to tens of thousands of deaths on both sides, destruction, devastation, millions fleeing in desperation, now displaced, causing Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War II. And as we mark the solemn anniversary and the war, which has offered many lessons in defence, diplomacy, Ukrainian resilience and solidarity in response to Putin's madness, it is now time for NATO leaders to step up. GB News Home and Security editor Mark White has the special report.
12 months on from the Russian invasion, the battle across Ukraine continues to rage on many fronts. None more fiercely than here in the eastern city of Bakhmut, where Putin's forces are desperate for a symbolic victory, ahead of their major spring offensive expected any day. Hardly a building here is untouched by the months of shelling and missile strikes. The life expectancy for troops on the front line around Bakhmut isn't measured in weeks or days, but in hours. Yet somehow Ukrainian forces are continuing to hold out. As this embattled nation enters its second year of conflict, the toll on Ukraine's military and on its civilian population is unbearably grim. They are in desperate need of more aid. The US President's visit to Kyiv was the headline act in a chorus of world leaders in recent days lining up to proclaim their support for Ukraine. But the chair of the Commons Defence Committee says it's now time for those leaders to speed up their military support.
We've been too hesitant to date to provide the necessary hardware. A year it took for us to pluck up the courage to provide the tanks, and now we're having the same debate about air power as well. We should recognize that this is about Russia, standing up to Russia. Ukraine happens to be the theatre of war.
President Zelensky could not have been clearer on his recent trip to the UK. He's desperate for Western fighter jets. For now, Rishi Sunak is only offering pilot training. Any move to supply highly complex kit, like aircraft, will not be quick, according to one former general experienced in logistics. And the longer it takes, the more advantageous that is for the Kremlin.
When you provide this equipment, you have to provide all of the capability of sustaining it and operating it. The ability to deliver this capability that he's after now to conduct offensive operations is not easy, and it will take a long time. And I'm not convinced that Russia's going to hang around and wait for all this stuff to arrive. It's going to conduct a major offensive to try and preempt the Ukrainian ability to conduct their own offensive operations.
In Russia, Vladimir Putin has effectively put his military and the economy on a war footing, setting up factories to refurbish old Soviet-era armour and massively stepping up production of munitions. There is no doubt, say analysts, that Moscow is in this for the long run.
They're going to continue this pressure. And as I say, we collectively, I think, are going to, we're going to struggle to enable Ukraine to hold out in this fight over the next months, if not years.
And there is another deeply alarming possibility on the horizon. US officials believe China, which has so far only provided non-lethal aid to Russia, may be preparing to offer weapons. Beijing says it has no such plans, but any move in that direction would be seen as a major escalation in this bloody conflict on NATO's borders. Mark White, GB News.
Well, I'm delighted to say now that I'm joined by a member of the Ukrainian Parliament for the People's Party, Andrei Osashuk. Andrei, thank you very much for joining me today. I suppose people are marking this solemn anniversary in a range of ways. What's your thoughts today, 1 year on?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here. Today the Ukrainian Parliament gathered together in the House of Parliament in the center of the Kiev city, and we did our job approving necessary laws and regulations. We did the same exactly 1 year ago when the invasion started, when the missiles and bombs were exploding in Kiev, around the Kiev. And at that day, no one was giving us even a week. But we see how this year changed everything inside of Ukraine, and which is even probably more important, changed everything around Ukraine, especially in Western understanding of mistakes, which was done during decades probably, and with understanding of the Western mistakes in underestimation of Ukraine and overestimation of Russia. So everything was changed for the year. We paid huge price for that. Thousands and thousands of innocent people, thousands of military personnel has been killed, thousands injured, and it will take years and years for recovery. And all that is the payment for mistakes of the past. But now the best and the good news, which from one side that Ukraine is not able to resist but able to attack, and the best news that the West, all our allies agreed that the only way to bring the peace to Europe is Ukrainian victory. The only way for Ukraine to win is to receive enough military capabilities to continue to defeat Russians on Ukrainian soil. It's difficult, it's painful, but it's possible, and we want to complete this war as soon as possible. Because every day, every hour, it's a suffering of millions, it's deaths and destructions all over the country. We shall finish this nightmare in the middle of Europe as soon as possible. And as I'm repeating since March of last year, duration of this war directly linked to the readiness of the West to provide Ukraine with military support and military ammunition, and to impose sanctions of Russian Federation. Because from one side, we need to defeat Moscow in Ukrainian soil with military capabilities. From another side, they finally need to cut all economical for Russian regime to conduct this war. Hopefully this year we will receive both results.
Yeah. Well, Andrei, thank you so much for joining us from Kiev and giving us your feelings today on what is an absolutely solemn anniversary. But we send you all our best wishes and look forward to speaking to you again. Moving on then, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace spoke to GB News Breakfast this morning about fighter jets being sent to Ukraine, and this is what he had to say.
Long-term plans for Ukraine, building their resilience where they can have time to develop those capabilities. We will help now start training them in the use of those planes, but I don't think you're going to see in the medium or short term a whole load of British planes just delivered into Ukraine.
We now go live to our political reporter, Catherine Foster, who's on College Green. Catherine, you heard that short clip there from Ben Wallace. Boris Johnson had something slightly different to say, didn't he?
Boris Johnson has reiterated, as he said a couple of weeks ago when Volodymyr Zelensky was here behind us in Westminster Hall asking for the jets. Boris Johnson said then and is saying again now, send them the jets now. However, unfortunately for Boris Johnson, he is no longer Prime Minister or even indeed Prime Minister, but one, the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has asked the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, to look at sending fighter jets, but it is very clear from what Ben Wallace is saying that they are not going to be supplying any Typhoon jets or similar directly to Ukraine anytime soon, partly because there's huge logistical difficulties. They're very different to fly to the Soviet-era MiG jets that Ukrainian pilots are used to flying. They need longer runways. They're very complicated bits of kit. But what the British government are saying is that they stand ready to send Typhoon jets to countries in Eastern Europe, for example, Poland, if and when they are ready to supply Soviet-era MiGs directly to Ukraine. So Britain would effectively backfill those planes. And of course, we are also sending long-range missiles. Now, Rishi Sunak is having a conference call with the G7 this afternoon, hoping to galvanise them to do more and do more fast, because time really is of the essence, and specifically encouraging them to send these long-range missiles. Now, some debate over whether we'll be sending Storm Shadows or Harpoons, but we have led the way really since the beginning of the war in supporting Ukraine, first with Boris Johnson and now, of course, with Rishi Sunak.
Catherine, thanks so much for joining us. That's Catherine Foster, our political reporter there down in College Green near to Westminster. Well, coming up, we'll be talking to Conservative MP Duncan Baker about the Ukrainian family he has been caring for and his recent trip to Ukraine. But before that, let's take a look at the weather.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. A dry, cold weekend ahead for most. Today, a bit more mixed. Sunny spells across the north, quite a lot of cloud in the south, and a really cold wind blowing down the eastern side. We've got low pressure away to the east. This high will dominate our weather through the weekend. It's trying to move in, but it's not here yet. We do have this weather front sinking southwards, bringing a fair bit of cloud and some outbreaks of rain this afternoon to parts of Wales, the Midlands and southern England. Further north, we're seeing brighter skies, some sunshine, just one or two showers for eastern Scotland and northeast England. Quite a cold wind, though, picking up across eastern parts in particular. Elsewhere, the winds are light and it's still pretty mild in the south, 10, 11, 12 degrees Celsius. But as I say, feeling a lot colder than 8 or 9 on that east coast. It'll be a colder night tonight. Some patchy rain for South Wales and southwest England through the evening. That'll scoot away. A few showers will come into parts of the east. We may see a little bit of snow over the hills, but generally it'll be just rain showers that we see coming in, and not many of those. Most places dry. Clear skies for Scotland, Northern Ireland will allow a frost, and even further south we will see a frost, certainly rural areas, and many towns and cities will get close to freezing. So it is a cold start to the weekend. It'll stay pretty chilly, despite some good spells of sunshine. Again, quite a brisk and cold wind in the east, and there will be a few showers here. It's not going to be completely dry. A few showers for central and eastern parts of England, but nothing too heavy. Certainly further west and north, it's looking like a dry day, but temperatures will be lower, a lot colder than it has felt over the past couple of days. As we go through Saturday evening, not a great deal of change, 1 or 2 isolated showers in the east, most places staying dry. Again, where we have clear skies, there will be a frost on Sunday morning, probably quite cloudy skies during Sunday, but still some sunshine coming through. Again, a brisk and cold wind blowing, particularly in the south, and temperatures lower than they have been. Goodbye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. Now, since the war in Ukraine started, people and families across the United Kingdom have opened their doors to Ukrainian refugees into their homes. One of those very welcoming families was Conservative MP Duncan Baker. They opened the doors of their home to Anna and her 7-year-old son. Well, joining me now, I'm delighted to say, is Conservative MP for North Norfolk, Duncan Baker. Duncan, thanks for joining us. I'm just wanting to find out what the process was when you came home and said to your wife, do you know what, I think we're going to have a Ukrainian family to stay with us. Tell us about that decision and how hard or easy it was to make that decision.
Well, Arlene, it feels like a long time ago. I mean, I just remember it's a day today when we will always remember where we were when we heard that Russian missiles had hit Ukraine. And very swiftly afterwards, I was working in the department with Michael Gove that launched the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which was to bring Ukrainian families to the United Kingdom so that they could find safety. And I remember saying to Michael Gove, I think I'm going to do this. I think my family are going to help. And I went home and I said to my wife, look, what do you think about it? You know, as MPs, we can't often solve every problem in life, but we can show leadership and we can use our platform to try and help people. And so my wife was amazing. Straight away, she said, yes, let's do it. It was my children, Arlene, which were the ones which really I was struck by, because I said to them, you know, shall we do this, girls? What do you think about helping a little family come and live with us? And they said, oh, Dad, we can't do that. You know, we don't see you very much. They won't be able to talk English and it'll be very different in our house. And I said, girls, that's not the way to be. Sometimes in life, there are things you have to do to help others. And I want you to have a little think about this. And I'm very proud of them. They went to bed, they got up in the morning and they said, Daddy, we think we are absolutely right. We want to help somebody. And that's how it all started, Arlene.
Yeah, and it's a lovely story because you have 2 girls and this lady, Anna, that came to live with you, she has a little boy, hasn't she? And how did that all work out?
Oh, just amazing. I mean, from the very moment, and you're seeing my girls and little Svetic there, the two little ones, the little tiny girl and the little boy, they are the same age, actually. But Svetic's very, very big for his age. The Ukrainians, they're big, strong men, I tell you. And they're the same age. They were both 6, obviously, when they first met. And from the very first moment, they couldn't speak, obviously, a word of each other's languages, but they sat in the back of the car on the way back from Luton Airport, talking to each other in their own tongues, and they were just the best of friends from that very first moment. And look, you know, I don't know what goes on, but you could tell they were going to be friends. They knew that they had to look after each other, and that's the way they've been ever since. And so they, for a number of months, they were in bunk beds together. That's us all at Christmas together. And, you know, I have this little kind of, I don't know, romantic notion that one day, when this is all over, they will be the best of friends forever. And he'll be at my daughter's wedding, and she'll be at his.
Yeah, I was going to say, when they grow up, this is something that'll be always with them, the fact that they lived together for a period of time. And I know that you probably wanted it to be a short period of time so that they could go back to their own country. But am I right in thinking that they did go back with you just a few weeks ago to their home country? Tell us about that.
Yeah, we went back in November, first of all, to take blankets for the front line. We took little Svetic and his mum, Anna. We made that 2,000-mile trip, and we did it so that we could give aid, but also so that Anna could see her husband. He's the gentleman in the hat in the picture. Arlene, just the most incredibly moving moment to get to meet the man whose family you're looking after. And we said that we would come back. You know, he can't speak an awful lot of English. Anna can speak very good English now. And I just said to him, we left him on the side of the road and said, we don't know when we will see you again, but I make this promise to you that however long this takes, I will look after your family. And we have a bond. And so we went back last week in my recess. We took quite extraordinary 112 generators where myself and a gentleman called Rob Scammell in North Walsham in North Norfolk helped me raise huge amounts of money from the general public and others. We took all those generators and we were able to see Vitali again. We didn't take little Svetic this time because it was pretty difficult. Obviously, the missiles are going into sporadic locations. There was actually a missile strike in Lviv the night we were there. But it was great to play that role. And in that last picture we brought another refugee family back to England with us.
My goodness, I mean, it's just a wonderful story, Duncan, and it's so lovely to hear of the bond that has developed between you and Anna and Vitali and their little family. It's so lovely. So tell me about the generators then. Those were as a result of public donations, is that right, in terms of funding? And what will those generators be used for in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, on that first aid mission, we pulled a generator out of the back of our van. And the aid agency that we were working with, which is one that's linked to the military, they looked at this generator and they just said, where did you get this from? We are desperate for generators. It was that big blue one. And we said, you know, we got it donated by one of the town councils back in my constituency. And they said, we can't get these anywhere throughout the whole of Ukraine. We're desperate for them. We can't get them in Poland. So we got back to England and the group and I sort of sat down. We said, let's do this again. Let's go back with generators. And we thought we might get 30 or 40. We never thought we'd get over 100. And at Christmas time, we launched our appeal to donate online. We raised £18,500, Arlene, in 13 weeks from public donations. We raised about 40,000 in total cost because people went out and bought generators specifically for us and had them shipped to North Norfolk. And then we had people just, emptying their sheds and saying, someone needs this more than I do. And we took them all over. And they'll be used in orphanages, hospitals, on the front line for soldiers to charge up equipment, community buildings, and obviously for households that are being hit by these missile strikes. And obviously, little ones might cost, £400 or £500. The big ones, which can power actual buildings might be £2,000, and we managed to have enough money to buy a good range of different generators. And so the big ones at £2,000 a piece are pretty heavy pieces of kit.
Duncan, we're going to have to leave it there. I could talk to you all afternoon about what's going on with this lovely family, but do send my love to them, and thank you so much for joining me on the show this afternoon. Well, now, since Russia invaded Ukraine, the human cost and injuries incurred is, of course, enormous. But there's also an economic cost right across the world, given the importance of both countries and commodity exporters and related sanctions between Russia and the West. A year on from the start of the war, our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, examines the economic costs to the country of war in Ukraine.
A year ago today, Russia invaded Ukraine, sparking a war that's already killed and injured hundreds of thousands with no end in sight. The related economic war between Russia and the West has caused sharp rises in the cost of fuel, utilities and food across the world, not least Britain. Russia's historically provided 40% of the natural gas used across Western Europe, while pumping 10% of oil used worldwide. Those supplies have been disrupted. In January 2022, before this war, unleaded petrol in the UK averaged £1.46 per litre. 6 months later, forecourt prices peaked at £1.94 per litre, up more than a third, with prices going above £2 in some parts of the country. Prices have since eased, with unleaded petrol averaging £1.48 so far in February. So petrol prices are roughly back to where they were before the war. But diesel prices, as lorry drivers know, are still around 10% more expensive. Gas and electricity bills, though, are still much higher. In 2021, the average household spent around £1,300 a year on their combined utilities. That cost is now over £2,600, still more than double pre-war levels, despite wholesale energy prices coming down. Russia and Ukraine are also major exporters of wheat, grain and other foodstuffs, impacting prices everywhere. Since the war, UK bread prices are 20% higher, with eggs and milk up 29% and 39%, given the impact on the cost of farmers' feedstocks. And it's this combination of more expensive fuel, power and food that's seen British shoppers endure sky-high inflation. Already 5.5% last January, inflation spiked to 11.1% in October, a 40-year high, and remains in double digits today. That's left the Bank of England with no choice but to raise interest rates from 0.5% last February all the way up to 4% now. Those higher rates have raised mortgage costs, just as inflation has caused pay disputes and the worst strikes since the 1970s. While war is first and foremost a human tragedy, of course, there are economic costs as well. 1 year on, the costs to the British economy and living standards have already been very significant. And there's more to come.
It's Liam Halligan there, keeping us up to date on the economic cost of war. But coming up, we'll be talking to Russia expert Keir Giles about Russians' motivations and the likelihood of a spring offensive. We'll also be talking to Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the former commander of the US Army in Europe, to give the military perspective. But first, here's Rhiannon with your news headlines.
Thank you, Arlene. It's 2:33. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. A minute's silence was held across the UK this morning, marking 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. At Downing Street, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stood with Ukraine's ambassador to the UK to reflect on the country's losses. Britain's imposed a raft of new sanctions, including an export ban on every piece of equipment that Russia uses on the battlefield. President Putin's closest allies have also been targeted, among them his former chief of security and the chief executive of Nord Stream 2. In Kyiv, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky attended a ceremony with families of soldiers killed in the conflict. He described the past 12 months as a year of pain, sorrow, faith and unity. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have died following Russia's invasion, which has resulted in the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. And in breaking news, one of the rail unions involved in the long-running dispute over pay has voted to accept offers from train companies. TSSA says members voted overwhelmingly in favour of deals which include a 2-year pay rise worth 9%. Meanwhile, junior doctors will stage 3 days of strike action next month. The British Medical Associations announced they'll walk off the job from the 13th of March. Nearly 37,000 BMA members voted in favour of industrial action, the largest ever turnout for a ballot of doctors. Hamza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Reagan have all secured enough votes to advance to the next round of the SNP leadership contest. They managed to secure the backing of at least 100 members from a minimum of 20 local branches. A period of campaigning now gets underway, with the winner announced on the 27th of March. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Arlene.
Well, still to come in the briefing, we'll be live at a Ukrainian community centre to meet some of the people who fled the war and now called the UK their home. Now, let's have a short break.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Welcome back to the show. Well, we continue to reflect on the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia just a year ago today. Earlier this week, Vladimir Putin made his State of the Union address. In it, he described the current situation as a, quote, time of radical, irreversible change in the entire world. It's highly expected that Russia could be set to launch a new spring offensive in the coming weeks. And joining me now to discuss all of this and the motivations of Russia is Keir Giles, a senior consulting fellow on Russia at Chatham House. Keir, it was quite a long speech, about an hour and 45 minutes. What were the main things that you took out of what he had to say?
Well, an hour and 45 minutes, and yes, it felt a great deal longer.
The meat in the sandwich of the speech was a lot of fine detail about how Russia's economy is performing so well. And in a way, it was promises of pitchforking more money at Russians to keep them happy. But at either end of it, of course, it was the fire and brimstone threats against the West. And that was the most interesting part from the point of view of looking at how the war on Ukraine might be going in the future and whether President Putin changed his mind about the reasons why he launched it in the first place. And the answer is no, not at all. There's no indication at all that there's any stepping away from President Putin's 180-degree opposite view of the world from what's actually happening in real life. The picture he's selling to Russians is that Russia was defending itself against an aggressive West. He's even saying Russia didn't start this war, which to anybody who's looking at it from any other part of the world is nonsensical. But it fits this framework of what's been happening in the world that Russia has been telling its people about for more than a decade now.
Well, I suppose, Keir, in respect of Putin, he has to continue with his rationale for the war because he continues to send young men to Ukraine to face their death. And therefore, he has to say, it's not my fault. We're only defending ourselves. That's the rationale, surely, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. But, of course, this isn't new. This is precisely the rationale that Putin was stating before he abandoned all of these excuses in the very short period leading up to the war, when he finally became frank about how this was an imperial war. It was a war of reconquest of Russia's colonies to bring them back under Moscow's control. And that's the reason why this war is so important, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole of Europe, because Putin has stated very clearly that his ambitions don't stop at Ukraine.
And Keir, talk to us about the New START arms reduction treaty, because, of course, he said in that speech that he was suspending participation in that treaty. What's that treaty about, and why is it important that he has suspended his participation?
That's one of the last surviving arms control treaties from the end of the Cold War, the treaties that were supposed to keep us safe and secure in the new world that we thought was happening after the end of the Cold War, and it governs nuclear weapons. It's not a surprise that Russia is now stepping away from it. There's no such thing as suspending. In fact, if they don't observe it anymore, then effectively they are in breach of the treaty, suspension or no. But there had been plenty of signs that Russia was moving in this direction already. As with so many other arms controls treaties beforehand, the United States had already pointed out that Russia wasn't being compliant with the terms of the treaty. So it was half expected that they would say, this no longer suits us, we're now not going to observe it anymore. But interestingly, in his speech, Putin also referred to the nuclear arsenals of the UK and France, which he said were outside this arms control agreement. And we wonder if this is an excuse for ignoring it, or possibly a bargaining chip for having some kind of future arrangement that is more to Russia's liking.
Yes, Keir, thanks for bringing us up to date on all of that, and that long and rambling speech which you no doubt had to listen to, and which thankfully the rest of us didn't. So thanks for bringing us up to date. We're now going to turn to a Ukrainian community centre in Reading, where our South East England reporter Ray Addison is. Ray, are you there? Who have you been talking to today?
Yes, Arlene. Yes, hello, welcome to the Reading Ukrainian Community Centre. Now, not only has this played an important part in the community ever since it was first established back in 1969, but of course in the last year it's become a key place for people from across Reading to come and show their solidarity over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, Ina Gorgora was displaced by the war in her country and moved here to Reading as part of the Homes for Ukraine scheme. She joins me now. Ina, thanks very much for joining me. What do you remember about the day that Russia invaded?
I managed to leave Ukraine on the last flight from Kiev, and when I was in Istanbul airport, I saw on TV screens the news. I was not expecting, I was not believing that it is reality. So we were crying, and because my parents, they stay in Ukraine, in Bucha, which was occupied for about 1 month. Yeah, and we couldn't sleep, maybe 2 weeks. Every 1 hour we wake up and checking news, and we were not believing that it's for real. And we couldn't contact our parents because no electricity, no telephone was available. Some people sent me voice messages, and they were trying to escape. Some managed to escape. Some just got shot by Russia, and it was terrible to be in safe and not to and not able to help.
It must have been very, very worrying, a terrible time for you. Of course, you came to the UK in August under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. How have you been welcomed by people in Reading?
Well, I am so happy. First of all, Reading Ukrainian Community Center, it's just minutes from my home, so I found here kind of family. And because my sponsor, wonderful man, and we are so welcome in his house, and just time to time you need to speak on your own language. So we are coming here, we just meet each other, and it's like a second home.
Now, earlier on here at the centre, after the minute's silence, you were speaking to your brother-in-law, who's actually serving on the front line via video call. We were chatting to him. What was he telling you about the experience of serving on the front line?
He became a hero for me because sometimes news doesn't show us real reality, what happened in the battlefield. The most significant for me, I found out that they can see enemy like 5 to 10 meters from each other. They can see in eyes to each other, and they have no enough bullet to fight. And one more thing, if somebody get injured, the only option to survive is just crawling through night, or you are lucky if you are not freeze, or if you're bleed, and if you stop bleeding. So me personally, I send money to my friend to buy these clothes with chemicals to stop bleeding, because this is very important. We don't have enough.
Ina Gogora, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Now, Arlene, obviously you will have seen earlier, President Zelensky was tweeting saying it had been a year of pain, sorrow, faith and unity, but 2023 will be the year of victory. Well, certainly here at the Reading Ukrainian Community Centre, they're hoping that that is true.
Ray, thank you so much for bringing us that lovely piece there from Reading Ukrainian Centre. Well, on Monday, President Biden visited Ukraine for the first time since Russia launched their invasion last year. The president travelled by train to Kyiv to meet with President Zelensky. The next day, Vladimir Putin withdrew Russia from the New START treaty, which reduces nuclear arsenals and allows the US and Russia to monitor each other's nuclear weapons. Well, joining me now to discuss all of this is the former commander of the United States Army Europe, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. Ben, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. And President Biden in Ukraine, quite striking photographs of him walking with President Zelensky. How does the US and its citizens view the conflict in Ukraine 1 year on?
If you'll allow me, I'm so impressed with the two previous reports you just did. I know Keir Giles, of course, one of the best experts on Russia, and I enjoyed listening to what he just said. And then the gut-wrenching story from Ina there, her talking about what her family members are going through on the front line, very poignant. So congratulations to you guys for doing this. In the United States, when you're trying to judge sentiment, I always look to see how the Congress is reacting. And it appears to me that there is still very strong bipartisan support for what the United States is doing in Europe, in NATO, and specifically in support of Ukraine. At the Munich Security Conference, Senator Mitch McConnell, who was a senior Republican senator, brought a very large Republican delegation with him for the express purpose of trying to create distance between the leadership of the Republican congressional members and the crazies on the far right there. So to make it clear that they do support Ukraine, this is important.
And there's been a lot of talk here, and I'm sure in the US as well, Ben, about the need to send more military hardware, if you like, to Ukraine, to give them that push to make the difference in case they face this spring offensive. First of all, what are you hearing about the spring offensive? And do you think that's going to take place? And if that is the case, should the US, should the UK, should all of our NATO allies be sending more military hardware to Ukraine?
Well, for sure, the only criticism I have of my president in this whole endeavor is that we have not yet said we want Ukraine to win. They say everything except that. And of course, the same is true of other leaders in the West. So because we haven't committed to helping Ukraine win, we end up
half-stepping or being deterring ourselves a little bit about certain things that are clearly needed. There's no doubt that what has been provided, and the UK has been in front on so many of these things, is significant. It's huge, but it's not yet. It does not yet include what's needed for Ukraine to win, and that means more longer-range precision weapons, and of course, you heard the ENA there. I mean, those soldiers, they do not have enough ammunition. The Russians have only one advantage, and that is, of course, mass infantry. And so we've got to help Ukraine be able to neutralize that advantage, and that means precision weapons against Russian artillery, Russian headquarters, and Russian transportation.
Yes, and our Prime Minister is addressing a meeting of the G7, I think, at the moment, and he says he's going to urge his fellow leaders to move faster to arm Ukraine, particularly long-range weapons, because he believes there needs to be a decisive advantage to Ukraine. Is that the sort of leadership you want to see right across the NATO allies, Ben?
That's exactly it. This war could be over this year. I mean, if we're serious about defending our values, if we are serious about stopping the killing, and if we're serious about deterring the Chinese so that the Chinese do not take the wrong message of our perhaps lack of clarity, then we get it done this year. The so-called Russian offensive, I think it's already started, which tells you the fact that people are not sure has it started or not. That actually is a comment on the quality or the size of this so-called offensive. It looks to me that what the Russians have done is increase the numbers of poorly trained, poorly led, poorly equipped Russian conscripts and just push them into the existing meat grinder. But there is no, new armored division lurking in the woods somewhere waiting to come in from a surprise direction. They don't have that. Somebody said they're pulling airplanes out of storage. I would not want to get in a Russian airplane that's been in storage. I mean, given the poor way they've taken care of their other equipment. So I think the Russians actually are going to culminate by the end of May. And by that time, the Ukrainians will be ready with armored forces, including what the UK has provided, for a decisive strike heading southeasterly that will help isolate Crimea. That's the decisive terrain.
Great to hear from you, and thank you for your expertise. It's really good that you could join us today on this anniversary programme to talk about what's coming in Ukraine. Thanks for joining us. Well, political leaders across the divides in Northern Ireland have stood shoulder to shoulder with police officers this morning following the shooting of an officer earlier this week. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell remains in a critical condition in hospital and is heavily sedated. 4 men have been arrested in connection with the incident, and the leaders of the 5 main political parties met with the Chief Constable this morning to discuss all of this. We can go now live to GB News' Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie. Dougie, thanks for joining us. You're at police headquarters. Tell us about what you heard there this morning.
Well, this morning we did hear absolute unity from every single political party that was standing alongside the Chief Constable and condemning exactly what had happened here. We also were told that this 4th man arrested, he was 22, he was from Coal Island. He joins 3 other men. They're from 38, 45 and 47 years of age. They're being held in Musgrave Serious Crime Suite under the Terrorism Act. And really, it'll be a few days before we know if anything really comes of that. Dissident Republicans are being blamed, and as you know, dissident Republicans are many things, including a strong arm, I suppose, of organised crime. These ex-paramilitaries have to be funded some way. And the question was asked at this press conference of what would be happening south of the border with the Garda Síochána. And of course, the Chief Constable of the Garda Síochána, Drew Harris, was formerly of this parish, and he would have known John Caldwell on a personal basis. And we have been told that patrols on the southern side of the border in Ireland are now being upped to match that, to try and see can they stop this type of behaviour. Because, of course, John Caldwell just wasn't actually attacked. He was singled out in this. There was a very deliberate act to attack him when he was at his weakest, when they would have known he would have had no weapon with him, when he was with young people, and when especially he was with his son, and he would have done his best, as he did, it now appears, to protect not only his son but 2 other youngsters that were with them as he was being attacked. And of course our thoughts are very much with him and his family at this minute.
And Dougie, unfortunately, John's not the first police officer to be targeted in this very direct way. But there was a change today because everybody was condemning this from a political point of view, and that is something I'm sure that the police welcomed this morning.
Very much so. You and I would have remembered not that long ago when all these politicians wouldn't have stood in the one place and they wouldn't have condemned a shooting on a police officer at all. It shows you actually how far we have came in Northern Ireland over the last 25 years. But it does not take away from the fact that this was a serving police officer here to protect the community in Northern Ireland and has been attacked in a very public way and singled out to be on the wrong side of organised crime and Republican paramilitaries, it now appears.
Dougie, thanks for that report, and of course I want to send my best wishes to John Caldwell and of course his family, including his young son who had to witness this brutal attack which took place on his dad on Wednesday night. Well, you've been watching The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster. It's been a show all about Ukraine today, as you would expect on this anniversary. And I hope you enjoyed our guests as they brought you different perspectives about what was happening there. The show's back every Friday, as you know, from 2 p.m. And up next, it's Patrick Christie's.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. A dry, cold weekend ahead for most. Today, a bit more mixed. Sunny spells across the north, quite a lot of cloud in the south, and a really cold wind blowing down the eastern side. We've got low pressure away to the east. This high will dominate our weather through the weekend. It's trying to move in, but it's not here yet. We do have this weather front sinking southwards, bringing a fair bit of cloud and some outbreaks of rain this afternoon to parts of Wales, the Midlands and southern England. Further north, we're seeing brighter skies, some sunshine, just 1 or 2 showers for eastern Scotland and northeast England. Quite a cold wind, though, picking up across eastern parts in particular. Elsewhere, the winds are light and it's still pretty mild in the south, 10, 11, 12 degrees Celsius. But as I say, feeling a lot colder than 8 or 9 on that east coast. It'll be a colder night tonight. Some patchy rain for South Wales and southwest England through the evening. That'll scoot away. A few showers will come into parts of the east. We may see a little bit of snow over the hills, but generally it'll be just rain showers that we see coming in and not many of those. Most places dry. Clear skies for Scotland, Northern Ireland will allow